Well, if a pending economic crisis is pushing the United States to transition away from empire towards back to a republic, then I think that that will be the foundation of a great power partnership with Beijing and Moscow. I think they would welcome this, and they would see the possibility of the U.S., not being an inherent adversary, but rather a U.S. is much more capable of working with, one with more modest objectives in the international system. So I agree with you. I think that if Beijing and Moscow, they like to see the gradual decline of the U.S. empire, that is, ideally to be a stable republic, but so they saw the debt getting slowly out of hand, and I think they were hoping for a gradual decline and then find a new role. A collapse of the United States, though, a massive crack, that would be extremely disruptive, and it wouldn't give the Chinese and Russians much time to adjust either. So none of this, I think, would be good for the international system. Also, when you have this rapid shifts in international power, it's usually difficult for the system to reform. Uh,
And
but
I interrupt just for a second.
yeah.
I spent, probably 16 or 17 hours in the last 3 days listening to all these different people who I think are worth listening to, including a couple of your interviews. And what I see is people, uh, I'm guilty. I'm totally guilty too, mea culpa, um, dealing in the weeds right now. When these huge changes are getting ready to envelop people. I mean, the fiscal crisis alone in this country, even if it's handled well, and I don't for a moment think it will be by this group, but even if Xi Jinping tacitly agrees and, Scott Bessent gets what he wants, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go on bended knee to Beijing and beg. That's the nature of his challenge. We're messing around with so many little things, especially Trump's proclivity, that we could put all manner of obstacles into some kind of smooth transition, if you will. And that really troubles me. And not the least of those obstacles could be someone who really gets, as I've pointed out before, really gets angry and irritated at the whole process and starts threatening with nuclear weapons. That could be an outcome of this. And there are people in this administration and people behind it in the shadows who kind of have those kind of inclinations. You listen to someone like Lindsey Graham and you hear the forward-most voice in that regard. Or you listen to Marco Rubio, a member of the administration even, and you hear a strident voice in that regard. I don't for a moment put it past them to think that better to go out in a mushroom cloud or a series of them than to go out being saved by a handout from Xi Jinping, which is probably the way they would put it. So it's not, I'm not saying it's a safe time. I'm not saying it's a positive time. I'm saying there's all kinds of obstacles that could be in the way. But I am saying that I think the Secretary of the Treasury, who is number one right now, and I go back to the housing crisis when even my president at that time was looking at the Secretary of the Treasury and saying, help me, save me. That was a minor example of what was to come. This is big. This is really big. This is earth shaking. How are you going to deal with $3 trillion of debt instantly in the new year? How are you going to do that? There's only one way. There's only one dude in the world that's got those kind of deep pockets. But will we do it right? That's a huge question. It's a huge question. We could really make a mess of it. And in making a mess of it, we'll make a mess of it for the others too. And they know that. And that's probably the greatest pressure on them to try and keep us sane as we do this.
Well, I've spoken to Ambassador Jack Matlock, and he warns about the lessons from a fake history. So, for example, by claiming that the Cold War was won. He said that this created a very dangerous military culture in the U.S. The assumption that, well, we didn't end the Cold War through compromise, but we stared down the Russians and they just they collapsed. And he also made the point is comparable to the Cuban Missile Crisis, because we leave out all the diplomacy and compromises and we just do the, like some Westerns, stand toe to toe, and the other guy blinked first, so we won. So I guess my point is that this kind of a militaristic thinking of history could perhaps incentivize some grand standoff at the end, some to regain former glory. I don't know. I just see I'm watching Venezuela. This is starting to look like an actual attack. Soon we're watching Iran. It looks like they might go after Iran. And I'm not sure if you watched this prank call, which someone fooled Amanda Sloat, which was Biden's top advisor. She was sitting there in this, call it an interview, saying that, well, the Minsk agreement wasn't really a mistake. This gave many years for the Western intelligence agencies to embroil themselves into, or embroil, that's not the right word, to embed themselves properly within Ukraine. It could pump the country full of weapons and train a big army. And also now, they more or less recommended, she and her other Biden advisor, that this was time to find a peace agreement which they can make Russia believe that they won, and then, of course, begin to change realities on the ground. So it just looks like there's a powerful force within Washington that just thinks, if we just, stand up against our opponents, we can win back former glory. But this is the problem is the economics of it, though, because there's no capabilities or intentions. It's just that the foundation which is melting away, it seems.
I'm told there was someone, I want to think that it was Susie Wiles, but I don't know, especially since the interview she did. But there was someone in the administration that actually presented the little quip that we came up with, the Eisenhower Media Network and other guys, to Trump. And it was that the United States is going to sell weapons it does not have to the Europeans for money they don't have, to the Ukrainians for soldiers they don't have. That's where we are in the reality of Ukraine. And I think the White House understands that now. I think that's one of the incentives behind Trump's wanting a deal. Much larger incentive is what I just described earlier. I think Besant has made sure he sees the fact that he's presiding over the empire at a very, very dangerous time, and that some of the things he might have to do are going to be things that fly against Trump's character, if there's any character there at all. But I think it's going to be persuasive. I hope it will be persuasive. If it's not, you're right. We're going to have a situation of such chaos that I would think that eventually the positive side of that chaos will be Trump being impeached successfully, thrown out, Vance then becoming the president, who's a much more pragmatic man, in my view, and having to deal with this and having to deal with it in a very pragmatic way. And the Congress is going to come on like a sheepdog because the situation is going to be quite serious. That's one eventuality. Another one, of course, is like I said, we could make such a hogwash mess of it that we wind up, actually having a big war, thinking that big war will somehow refresh us and get us out. It won't do anything but finish us off a lot more quickly than we would have otherwise. And it will do a lot of damage to the world. And if it's nuclear weapons we resort to in the end, which it well could be, lots of damage to the rest of the world. And I think both Putin and Xi Jinping are seized of that fact, and they realize that. So they will have that out there as a red letter day event. Don't go there. Do everything you can to possibly prevent that. At the same time, they're not going to sacrifice their position in the world for the savior of us if we won't cooperate. That sounds ridiculous, but it isn't. It's the serious situation we confront today. I go back to about 20 years ago when we had a really good discussion. Was it 20 years? I guess it was, in the policy planning staff at State. And we threw up just an idea, a straw man, if you will, about having a consortium in the world. we realized, I think, the smarter people in policy planning, which incidentally is about the only smart place in the U.S. government in terms of looking at the future, strategic thinking, and so forth, which is why it's so often downplayed by U.S. presidents. Condi, we wrote the first strategy, national security strategy in 2000. We wrote it, sent it over to Condi. She didn't like it. So Richard Haas said, okay, fine. What she wound up doing eventually, contracting it out to a think tank. So what we were talking about was, what if there were a consortium, call it a consortium in the world, and the consortium heads were China, Beijing, Washington, Moscow, and Tokyo. Oh, don't you want to throw Brasilia in there? Maybe Delhi? Well, let's just start with this and let's see what we get. And we were drawing up a kind of a straw man of what that consortium would look like, and how would you handle it politically? How would you sell it to the world? You know, it sounds like global government or something like that, you know. But that's really what we're talking about when we talk about peer powers, 3 or 4, 5, maybe, in a world of near peer powers at the next level, and there might be as many as 20 of those. You know, think about the G20 and the G8 and all those old formulations, and then the rest of the world. And how do you make that not a trickle-down economic structure, but an economic structure that shares wealth in a reasonably fair and equitable way? It's doable, we thought, but no one wanted to talk about it. Certainly no one in George W. Bush's White House wanted to talk about it. And my own boss, Colin Powell, didn't want to talk about it. But that's where we're headed if we're smart. We're headed towards running the world, if you will, not from the national, David Rothkopf's book, Running the World, the National Security Council, not from the National Security Council of Washington, but from the combined strength and money of the major powers in the world, and with a fair and equitable underneath, if you will. Better by far than what we presently have. More distribution of the wealth, more equitable distribution of the wealth. It'll never be perfect, certainly. It won't even be close to perfect. There'll never be justice in the world. There never has been. But you've got to figure out some way to accommodate these power shifts in a way that doesn't destroy one side and elevate the other side in the old traditional fashion, but mellows it across a lot of countries, a lot of people, and tackles such things as the climate crisis and nuclear weapons. I thought at the time, and I told my boss, you need to look at this. This is not bad thinking. And, you know, he wouldn't. He told Richard Haas, how would you operationalize this? Typical military guy, you know. How would you operationalize this? Well, first thing you'd have to do is have real diplomacy. And you'd have to go to the White House and talk to that guy and tell him, ever thought about becoming a diplomat yourself? I mean, you know, it sounds simple. It sounds pie in the sky, too simple. But some sort of thing like that is probably going to have to be developed.
Well, I already seen some reports though
On
that sorry?
you re-energize or get rid of the UN. You create a new entity that actually is serious because you've energized it with money and troops. What the UN Charter said to do, remember, the Charter still has that section. It says you will provide, you being the permanent 5 and any other countries that want to contribute, a standing military force for the UN Secretary General that will go out and do things like peacekeeping and peace enforcement. We never have made that paragraph operational. You'd have to do that with some kind of new organization. I'd say replace the whole damn kit and caboodle and move the damn headquarters of the kit and caboodle to someplace else, like Delhi or Shanghai or wherever. Get it out of New York. Make the dramatic change in your international mechanism and make it more effective. It'll never be totally effective, but make it more effective.